The starship Velorian Dawn had once been a symbol of pride. Built by the Aurelian Stellar Union, it was designed to be one of the most advanced exploration vessels in the known galaxy. Its curved silver hull reflected starlight like a mirror drifting through the void. Every component of the ship represented centuries of Aurelian engineering mastery. But now the Velorian Dawn was dying. The ship drifted helplessly in a silent region of space far beyond the nearest star system. Emergency lights flickered along the corridors, bathing everything in a dim amber glow. Inside the bridge, Captain Lyra Vale stared at the holographic damage display with growing despair. Red warning symbols covered nearly every system. Propulsion, offline. Power distribution, critically unstable. Navigation array, destroyed. Primary reactor containment, 37% failure probability. And worst of all, the gravitic warp core, the heart of the ship's faster-than-light drive, had fractured during their escape from the pirate ambush. Aurelian warp cores were delicate masterpieces of engineering. When damaged, they were nearly impossible to repair outside a fully equipped shipyard. Which meant one thing. They were stranded. Lyra slowly exhaled, her crest feathers flattening against her silver scalp, a sign of deep stress among Aurelians. "How long before the reactor fails?" she asked quietly. The ship's systems officer, Terrell, tapped several glowing panels. "Based on current degradation rates, 14 hours. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the bridge, the crew exchanged uneasy glances. Aurelians were known throughout the galaxy as calm, analytical beings. Panic was considered irrational. But 14 hours of life support left little room for logic. The communications officer cleared her throat. "We have transmitted distress signals to every frequency within range." Lyra looked at her. "Any response?" Pause. "None. Of course not. They were on the edge of an unexplored sector. No colonies. No stations. No patrol routes. Just endless empty space." Lyra leaned back in her command chair. "For the record," she said softly, "state the reason the ship cannot be repaired." The chief engineer, Cavern, stepped forward reluctantly. Cavern was an elderly Aurelian whose knowledge of starship systems was legendary within the Union fleet. But even he looked defeated. "The warp core fracture destabilized the gravitic lattice," Cavern explained. "Repair requires a synchronized recalibration of 16 field nodes while simultaneously balancing antimatter flow." Lyra nodded slowly. "A standard repair procedure." "Yes," Cavern said. "But the control matrix was destroyed in the explosion. So we rebuild it." Cavern hesitated. "That is impossible." The word echoed across the bridge. "No one," Cavern continued, "has ever repaired a gravitic lattice manually. Not outside a shipyard. Not with field tools." The captain studied the hologram again. "Then the ship dies." "Yes." Silence filled the bridge. Finally Lyra turned toward the communications officer again. "Continue transmitting the distress call." The officer nodded. "But Captain, if anyone does receive it, they would need extremely advanced engineering knowledge to even attempt repairs." Lyra gave a tired smile. "At this point, I would accept a miracle." 2 hours later. Deep in an entirely different star system, a small, somewhat battered cargo vessel drifted lazily near an asteroid belt. The ship was called the Rust Bucket. And its name was extremely accurate. Panels were mismatched. Hull plating showed signs of at least 3 different repair jobs. A section of the ship had clearly been welded back together after what looked like a catastrophic explosion. Inside the engine bay, a human sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by tools. His name was Marcus Hale. And he was currently arguing with an engine. "Okay," Marcus muttered, tightening a bolt with a wrench. "You and I both know that wasn't my fault." The engine responded by emitting a puff of smoke. Marcus sighed. "Fine. Maybe it was slightly my fault." He wiped grease off his hands and leaned back. Marcus Hale had once been a certified engineer for the Terran Interstellar Fleet. Then he got bored. Now he traveled the galaxy fixing things for anyone who paid enough credits. Cargo ships. Mining rigs. Old station reactors. Once he had even repaired a pirate cruiser, though that job had ended with him stealing half their spare parts and leaving. Marcus liked complicated problems. And right now, the Rust Bucket's engine was only moderately complicated, which meant he was getting bored again. Suddenly a faint beep sounded from the ship's communications console. Marcus looked up. Huh. He stood and wandered into the cockpit. The console blinked repeatedly. Distress signal detected. Marcus leaned closer. Now that's interesting. He tapped the screen. A distorted transmission filled the speakers. Any vessel receiving. This is the Aurelian exploration vessel Velorian Dawn. Critical systems failure. Warp core destabilized. Request emergency assistance. Marcus whistled. Aurelian ship, huh? He brought up the data packet attached to the signal. His eyebrows rose. Whoa. The damage report was extensive. Warp core fracture. Control matrix destroyed. Propulsion offline. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Yeah, that ship is absolutely doomed. He stared at the screen for several seconds. Then he grinned. Which means it's probably fixable. He activated the transmitter. This is independent engineer Marcus Hale responding to your distress signal. There was a pause. Then the alien voice returned, cautious and formal. You are responding to our signal? Yep. State your species. Marcus chuckled. Human. Another pause. Longer this time. You are a human engineer? Marcus stretched in his seat. That's right. The voice sounded uncertain now. Our vessel has sustained catastrophic gravitic core damage. I saw the report. The repair is impossible. Marcus grinned wider. Impossible repairs are kind of my specialty. Silence. Then the alien voice spoke again. Human engineer. If you are joking, this is not an appropriate time. Marcus turned toward the Rust Bucket's engine room. Trust me, he said casually. If your ship hasn't exploded yet, I can probably fix it. Another pause. Our chief engineer states that no one can repair the gravitic lattice manually. Marcus leaned forward and cracked his knuckles. Well, he said, good thing I'm not no one. What do you mean? Marcus powered up his ship's engines. I mean, he said, I'm on my way. Aboard the Velorian Dawn. On the bridge, the crew stared at the communication console in stunned silence. Captain Lyra slowly turned toward Engineer Cavern. Did the human just say he can repair the warp core? Cavern's crest feathers trembled. That is scientifically impossible. Terrell leaned forward. Captain, scans confirm a small vessel entering our system. Lyra folded her arms. Show me. The main display zoomed in on the approaching ship. The bridge crew collectively blinked, because the vessel looked terrible. Uneven plating. Exposed wiring. One engine appeared to be held in place by metal clamps. It looked less like a starship and more like a collection of spare parts flying in formation. Cavern whispered in horror. That vessel should not be capable of interstellar travel. Lyra frowned. And yet it is. The ship continued approaching. Finally it docked with their emergency airlock. Moments later the door opened, and a human walked inside. Marcus Hale stepped through the airlock carrying his heavy metal toolbox. The corridor beyond was dimly lit by flickering emergency lights. Panels had been removed from the walls, exposing complex alien circuitry. The entire ship vibrated slightly, like a wounded animal struggling to breathe. Marcus whistled. Yeah, that's not good. A group of tall, elegant aliens stood waiting for him. The Aurelians were taller than humans, with smooth silver skin and narrow glowing eyes. Feather-like crests extended from the backs of their heads, shifting color with emotion. Marcus noticed that several of them looked extremely uneasy. One stepped forward. I am Captain Lyra Vale of the Velorian Dawn. Marcus offered a casual nod. Marcus Hale. Independent engineer. Lyra studied him carefully. The human looked unimpressive. Average height. Unshaven. Grease stains all over his clothes. His toolbox appeared older than some star systems. Lyra spoke carefully. You understand our situation? Marcus shrugged. Warp core fracture. Control matrix blown out. Gravitic lattice destabilizing. He tilted his head toward the floor. Also, your reactor cooling loop is running about 10% below safe flow rate. The Aurelians exchanged surprised looks. Marcus grinned. You can feel it through the deck vibrations. Engineer Cavern stepped forward quickly. You claim you can repair the gravitic lattice? Marcus tilted his head. I didn't say it would be easy. Cavern looked offended. It is impossible. Marcus laughed. You aliens say that word way too much. Cavern stiffened. No engineer in the galaxy has ever manually recalibrated a gravitic lattice. Marcus leaned closer to the old alien. Well, today might be the first time. Lyra folded her arms. You are very confident. Marcus shrugged. Confidence is cheaper than panic. He glanced around the corridor. So, where's the broken thing? The warp core chamber. The group led Marcus through several dark corridors until they reached a massive circular door. Beyond it lay the warp core chamber. The door opened slowly. The moment Marcus stepped inside, he stopped walking. Oh. Even he looked impressed. The warp core was enormous. A towering cylinder of glowing blue energy surrounded by rings of floating gravitic stabilizers. Energy arced across fractured containment nodes like lightning trapped inside a bottle. Several of the stabilizer rings were cracked. One entire control assembly had been blown apart. Marcus walked around the chamber slowly. He examined the damage. Then he scratched the back of his head. Yeah, that's pretty bad. Cavern crossed his arms triumphantly. You see. Marcus crouched beside a shattered control panel. But not impossible. Cavern blinked. That is not logical. Marcus opened his toolbox. Inside were dozens of strange tools. Some human, some alien, some that looked handmade. Lyra watched him carefully. What exactly is your plan? Marcus stood and pointed toward the damaged lattice. Simple. The entire engineering crew leaned forward. We rebuild the control matrix manually. Cavern looked horrified. That would require balancing 16 gravitic nodes simultaneously. Marcus nodded. Yep. That cannot be done by one engineer. Marcus shrugged. Good thing there are like 20 of you. The Aurelians stared at him. Marcus began handing out tools. You hold this node. You monitor that energy flow. You shut down the secondary stabilizer if I yell. Lyra frowned. You are assigning tasks without explaining the procedure. Marcus grinned. That's because explaining it would take too long. Cavern shook his head. This is madness. Marcus pointed at the dying warp core. You have 10 hours before the reactor collapses. He tossed the scanner to Cavern. So either we try the crazy human method, or you wait here and explode politely. The old engineer hesitated. Then he caught the scanner. What do you need me to do? Marcus smiled. Now we're talking. The crazy plan. For the next hour, Marcus turned the warp core chamber into organized chaos. Cables were rerouted. Panels were removed. Temporary power bridges were built from spare components. At one point Marcus used duct tape to hold a stabilizer conduit in place. Cavern stared at it in horror. That material is not rated for gravitic energy. Marcus shrugged. It's rated for optimism. Lyra stood near the center of the chamber watching the process. She had never seen engineering done like this. Aurelian engineers followed strict procedures. Precise calculations. Controlled adjustments. Marcus treated the entire warp core like a giant puzzle. He moved constantly. Climbing ladders. Sliding under panels. Rewiring circuits while explaining things rapidly. At one point he shouted, "Okay, if that node spikes above 20%, yell at me." Cavern looked up from his scanner. What happens if it reaches 20%? Marcus yelled back. Then we're all vapor. Cavern nearly dropped the scanner. 6 hours later. The repair had begun. Marcus stood at the central control node holding a makeshift control device built from 3 separate consoles. All right, he said. Time for the dangerous part. Lyra stepped closer. You said that about the last part. Marcus nodded. That was the warm-up. He pointed around the chamber. Everyone ready? The Aurelians took their positions. Cavern held a gravitic stabilizer control rod. Terrell monitored the reactor flow. 2 others balanced energy distribution manually. Marcus took a deep breath. Okay. He activated the device. The warp core roared. Energy surged through the fractured lattice. One of the stabilizer rings began spinning violently. Node 3 spiking, someone shouted. Marcus twisted a dial. Compensating. Another ring sparked violently. Containment dropping. Push more power into channel 6. Marcus yelled. Cavern hesitated. That will overload the... Just do it. Cavern obeyed. The chamber shook. Energy surged through the lattice. For several terrifying seconds the warp core screamed like a collapsing star. Then suddenly, everything stabilized. The glow returned to a steady blue. The rings slowed. The alarm stopped. Silence filled the chamber. Marcus leaned against the console. Huh. Lyra stared at the core. It's stable. Cavern checked his scanner. His crest feathers rose in disbelief. The gravitic lattice is recalibrated. He looked at Marcus. That is impossible. Marcus grinned. Told you. Part 3, the galaxy's best repair. The warp core hummed steadily. For the first time in hours, the Velorian Dawn felt like a functioning ship again. The crew slowly gathered around Marcus. Lyra stepped forward. You saved this vessel. Marcus shrugged. Still gotta test the drive. The entire crew froze. Cavern whispered. Test. Marcus nodded. Yeah. Can't fix a warp core without trying it. Lyra looked uneasy. And if it fails? Marcus smiled. Then we explode slightly faster. No one laughed. Marcus clapped his hands. All right. Bridge time. Warp test. Moments later the bridge crew took their stations. The ship powered up. Systems came back online. Navigation rebooted. Propulsion stabilized. Lyra looked at Marcus standing beside the helm. You are certain this will work? Marcus scratched his chin. I'm about 70% sure. Lyra's crest feathers flattened. That is not reassuring. Marcus pointed forward. Punch it. The helm officer hesitated. Lyra nodded. Engage warp. The ship surged forward. Stars stretched into brilliant lines. The Velorian Dawn entered faster than light travel. The entire crew stared at the displays. No alarms. No instability. No explosions. The warp drive worked perfectly. Cavern slowly sat down. I do not understand. Marcus grinned. Human engineering. Lyra looked at him. What does that mean? Marcus thought for a moment. Aliens build things perfect. He tapped the console. Humans build things fixable. Lyra smiled slightly. That is a fascinating philosophy. The ship dropped out of warp safely near a nearby star system. The crew erupted in relieved laughter. They were alive. Later, Marcus returned to the airlock carrying his toolbox. Lyra walked beside him. The Aurelian Union will reward you greatly. Marcus shrugged. I'll send you the invoice. Lyra paused. You risked your life for strangers. Marcus leaned against the airlock frame. Engineers hate broken machines. He nodded toward the ship. And that one looked expensive. Lyra laughed softly. You humans are very strange. Marcus grinned. You should see our maintenance manuals. He stepped into the airlock. Lyra spoke again. Engineer Hale. Marcus looked back. Yes. If the Union ever requires assistance again. Marcus smiled. Just call. The airlock door closed. Moments later the small, ugly cargo ship detached from the Velorian Dawn. Cavern stood beside the captain watching it disappear. That vessel should not be space-worthy. Lyra nodded. And yet its engineer repaired our impossible damage. Cavern looked thoughtful. Perhaps we should study human engineering methods. Lyra smiled. Or perhaps. She watched the rust bucket vanish into warp. We should simply keep their number. The end.